Welcome to the Texas Conflict Coach radio program. If you have ever experienced or engaged in destructive or unresolved conflict, then you know it leads to broken relationships, distrust, and damaging results. Our program will help you manage and resolve conflict effectively with strategies, valuable resources, and support. I am your host, Patty Porter. My guest hosts, Zina Zameta and Stephen Kotev, along with our guest experts, will share our experiences, raise your awareness, and give you food for thought. We will share with you problem-solving strategies no matter what your situation is. At work, with neighbors or friends, family, and as partners. Tune in or join in the conversation every Tuesday evening.
Verbal Aikido is a means of communication that enables the practitioner to transform verbal attacks both effectively and peacefully. This philosophy comes from the Japanese martial art of Aikido that seeks to transform attackers into training partners. It's a fun and easy-to-learn approach that can be learned from ages as young as 5 years old. Regular practice of Verbal Aikido considerably increases self-esteem, altruism, and the confidence to manage conflict in a self-affirming and harmonious manner. Hello, I'm your guest host, Stephen Kotev, and joining us today for our program entitled Verbal Aikido, Manage Verbal Attacks Peacefully and Effectively is Luke Archer. Luke Archer is an Irish-born teacher, trainer, writer, and public speaker on communication, conflict management, and education development. He's been living in Lyon, France since 1995, where he has innovated and pioneered verbal Aikido training since 2009. He continues to work with companies, schools, and students of all ages, internationally spreading this means of peaceful communication to one boardroom or classroom at a time. Welcome to the program, Luke.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks for having me on the show.
It's a real pleasure to have you on the show, and I'm so happy that you could join us. As somebody who's spent over a decade training in Aikido, I'm kind of curious about how you found Aikido and how you discovered it and what it means to you.
Oh, Aikido. I actually first encountered it back in 1997, almost 20 years ago. In fact, it was my girlfriend at the time who was really into judo and was interested in getting me into martial arts. And in fact, Aikido was the only one at the time that I felt that I could do, because I think it was more of it was a very flowing and sort of non-aggressive, non-brutal, non-competitive nature that really attracted me to it at first. And I suppose it was, for me, the smoothest way of getting into martial arts. And that's really that was my initial impact into it. I suppose my initial how it all started off for me.
Well, and our topic is about verbal Aikido. So could you tell us a little bit more about your work with middle school students on this topic, and sort of kind of tie this all together for us? Sort of tie it from what you're doing now and how that is derived from Aikido.
All right. Okay. Well, I suppose what Aikido actually means for me is really quite a simplistic view, I suppose, of it. Maybe too simplistic, but when you take Aikido, I'm sure you know yourself as a practitioner, the Aikido means this path to balance or to harmonize energy. So that really was what I fell in love with from the very beginning. It was this means of taking whatever comes at you and being able to sort of embrace it and transform it into something quite positive. So I suppose it was 2008. I started my institute for educational development, and I was essentially working with teachers at the time. I was helping them manage their classrooms and have sort of better and more effective communication and more dynamic approaches to what they were working with. And in fact, it was at the time when it was about a year later, one of the schools I was working with asked me to develop a means to manage, the more aggressive, the more difficult students, if you like, that they were having to deal with. So they at the time it was because I had this experience in Aikido that I thought, this might be an interesting approach to have some sort of a verbal Aikido. So I worked on that, and it started to develop even more, and it became something that people were really found it fun. They found it very easy to implement, and that it was effective, and that it worked. And it wasn't long before I realized that it wasn't just with teachers, but in fact it was accessible for everybody. And in fact, it's since I suppose since 2014 now. I've been working with a middle school here in France. I was contacted by a science teacher, in fact, a guy called Luc Pavon, who read my book, Verbal Aikido, and was interested in getting me to come to the school to work with both the students and the teachers in an effort to find an alternative means to deal with bullying and to avoid things escalating from into, I suppose, physical attacks, etc. So, and also to improve the student-teacher relationships. So, I suppose there's we've been doing that, and it's been increasing in effectiveness and in scope, I suppose, as well. Basically, we focus on two things, I'd say. The first one is to help the kids develop appropriate reflexes when being confronted with a situation they find difficult, or what they would see as a conflict. So stepping out of the sort of fight, flight, or freeze reflex, so to not get stuck or not to fight back, but also to use their experiences so that they have their own difficult situations. They get insulted, they get accused, they get blamed for whatever, and to be able to step out of that situation, actually use that situation as the basis for developing their competency in verbal Aikido to step out of conflict and to I suppose see things and deal with them with another perspective. I think that's one of the key things that we sort of work on with them.
Well, so you said a lot, and there's a couple things that I want to make sure I'm following along, because I think our listeners will find it really fascinating. It seems like once you started training in Aikido, you really felt that there was a way, in a sense, to take what you were learning about blending and about harmony sort of out of the purely physical sense and into the more verbal day-to-day life that people are dealing with. Is that right?
That's completely right, Stephen. I think what really struck me was the depth of the philosophy behind it. In fact, there's so much reading material out there on Aikido that's quite astounding. There really is a world outside the dojo. So, I think it was one of my favorite sensei said on one stage, it's more important in Aikido what you do off the mat than what you do on the mat. So, really, what struck me from the beginning was that it was something that could be used in many, many situations, and it was powerful, and it was peaceful as well. There wasn't this idea of dominating. There wasn't this idea. You don't find Aikido in the Olympic Games because there's no winner. You're not trying to dominate, and as soon as you look to dominate, well then you've lost, basically. So the only mastery you have in is of yourself. So I think it was that idea of working on being able to master your own reactions and your own responses to whatever comes at you that really, really attracted me from the beginning. And that was what I tried to include in our responses to verbal attacks.
And that, I think, is probably one of the most compelling parts about Aikido is that there's something inherently transformative about the engagement. And, one of the things that, you mentioned, or as part of our introduction, is changing the concept of attackers into training partners. And so, you said a little bit about how you're helping these students look differently at the problems that they were dealing with. And so, could you sort of talk to us a little bit more about how you're encouraging these students to look differently at how they engage with conflicts? What are you teaching them that's different than what they've heard before?
Well, you're completely right. It is the perception and how you see things is really key here, and I think that's one of the points that we really insist on quite a lot is that if you're able to see what's coming at you, it may seem like a conflict, but if you're able to see it as more of an invitation to dance, and then you respond accordingly as if it is an invitation to dance, well then it changes so many things. It has a huge impact definitely on the outcome of what the situation would be, because if you see it as a fight, then you're automatically going to go into it as win-lose. But if it's dance, then that's much less the possible outcomes of it, So I think one of the key things that we focus on is that perception, but also this idea of your intention. And if your intention is a harmonious intention, again, that has a huge impact on your on the outcome, but also on sort of long-term relationships, because people will inevitably treat you the way you teach them to treat you. So this is one of the things that comes, I would say, repetitively back in the training that we do. It's that when we're working with kids, if they are responding, whether it's they're responding by just walking away and taking it, or whether they're responding by reacting and making it escalate into a physical attack, a fight. Well then, if the person that has started the exchange, if that's what they're looking for, well, that's when they're looking to do it again, they'll come back to you. Whereas if you respond to it differently, if you respond to it looking for a harmonious result, or looking to genuinely understand the person who is in difficulty, then you actually open things up to a greater understanding, but also to better relations long term overall. So I think that these are the key sort of concepts that we try to share with the kids, and that they're actually quite receptive to, because they can see very quickly the results and how simple it is and how efficient it can be put into place.
Well, and again, the whole framing of the interaction is very powerful. As you're presenting it, it's as opposed to this person insulted me and I'm going to insult them back, or this person scared me and I'm going to make them even more scared of me. That kind of classic, back and forth, tit for tat kind of behavior. You're saying you're encouraging the students to look at it as a dance, which is fundamentally much more about relationship. A dance is this sort of mutuality. It's a sense of engagement, and so that framing is one of the first things that you do to help the kids think differently about how they interact with each other. Is that right?
That's right. We do. We get them into actually the capacity to, once if they develop a reflex, in fact, and it is key, this idea of developing a reflex that they when somebody is acting, when they feel attacked, that they actually respond by accompanying the person. Before that, they do need to get centered, there's 3 steps basically in Verbal Aikido. If you're familiar with Dora the Explorer, for example, well, there's always like these 3 steps. So we try to simplify it to make it as easy to follow as possible, and it really gets. I don't think it gets it more simple than, there are 3 steps. So you always sort of know where you are. The first step is to be centered. It's to have that centered position. It's like with a sort of serene confidence, which we call the inner smile. The second step is to accompany the person. If you're familiar with Aikido, then you'll know the position, the movement, what we call irimi, which is this entering. You're really entering, and you're bringing your center closer to the other person's center. And for us, that is really what we would call this sort of heightened listening. So you're going to be listening to understand the person as best you can, and that's the accompaniment of the person. And then you're going to, at some stage, you're going to recognize that there's an opportunity where you can propose a balance or a common ground, or even just humor. And the whole point, the whole alternative, the whole idea that this is giving these kids is that it's a way to step out of conflict and respond differently, and it's a choice. It's an alternative that they're really starting to see, and they're really starting to put into place.
So, first one is to get centered, and that would be literally a physical, like a physiological activity, which would be them kind of getting out of that sense of anger or fear. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, we use anchoring. We use very many different techniques to do it, but essentially, we help people find their own way to get centered as quickly as possible. And even if they get destabilized, even if they get drawn back into the emotion, whatever, the idea is to come back to that center as quickly as they can.
So I just want to remind our listeners that you're listening to the Texas Conflict Coach Blog Talk radio program with myself, your guest host, Stephen Kotev. As part of our Back to School series, I'm joined today by Luke Archer for our conversation on Verbal Aikido, managing verbal attacks peacefully and effectively. So you got 3 steps to the process. The first is to get centered. From there, it's to accompany the person and to have a heightened sense of listening. Is that right?
That's correct.
So so that is, to me, the word accompanying it seems like it's very intentional. There's a very specific type of response that you're trying to get folks to do in this case. And it's, again, as it's opposed to that, you're saying how in Aikido, if you try to dominate somebody, you're doing it wrong. Accompanying it seems to have that very kind of mutual support, respect, togetherness kind of response. Is that right?
That's right. You're hitting the nail on the head there, Stephen. Yeah, it really is. It's this empathy really thing that we would use, that we find it just disarms. If you have a sincere and genuine desire to understand the other person, no matter what they're saying, that they get sort of taken by surprise and they're sort of taken off balance. And essentially it comes from this belief that I have that everybody wants to be understood. Show me somebody who will say, no, I don't want to be understood. People want to be understood. And if you look to do that in a conflict situation, and it's worth gold, that your capacity to listen in that very moment where somebody is throwing an attack at you, it has the largest impact that you can imagine. In fact, we do these what we call verbal stretching exercises, which, among many other things, it warms us up, but it also illustrates the subjectivity of all the words. All these words, they have what the word respect for you means a different word, different means a different thing, has different ideas and experiences behind it for me, and for every person listening, it's the same thing. We have different meanings behind these, and once we try and we realize that everyone has a different view of something, then if we try to understand it, then we're already one step closer to finding some sort of positive or harmonious outcome.
So what is the third step? Get centered, accompany the person, and just tell us one more time what the third step is.
The third step, it's a very interesting one. It's basically proposing what I call proposing Aiki, which is proposing a balance or a positive direction for the exchange. It should be your intention from the beginning. Definitely should. And it takes a little while to recognize, I suppose, when is the best time to use it. Timing is really quite important. In fact, you'll recognize it when the other person gets sort of surprised or destabilized. Their eyes can often sort of shift left to right, or they can move their body position a little bit, or they might start to stutter a little bit. But this is usually a good moment where if you're proposing something, there's just a lot greater chance of them accepting it. Whereas if you propose it from the outset, then they will just push it away because they're not sort of falling over or they're not unbalanced. So you're offering a balanced situation where they're feeling unbalanced. There's a greater chance that they'll actually accept it.
So, do you think we could try one? Do you have an example that you could give to our listeners where they could see you try the whole process out?
For sure. I mean, I don't know if it's a situation that you experienced that you'd like to explore, or would you like me to tell you how to insult me? What would you like?
No, I think it would just be nice if you had either an example that you've used in the past when you're instructing on this, or just something so that folks can sort of see how the whole thing fits or works together.
For sure. I mean, why don't you tell me that I'm really stupid? But actually,
Luke,
mean it, Stephen. Like, go into it and just actually really put all that energy behind it, and really, and respond as you would if you think somebody's really stupid.
Well, what's hard for me, Luke, is that I lived in Northern Ireland for almost a year, and so when I'm starting to talk to someone and I hear a little bit of that Irish brogue, I want to start insulting you in an Irish way, and I don't know if our U.S. listeners. I don't know if our U.S. listeners will get it, but I will tell them ahead of time that in Ireland, if you call somebody thick, it means that they're not very smart, and it means that they're kind of dense. So
yeah,
Luke,
we have
you're
that expression to be. What do you mean by thick, Stephen?
You're a dummy, Luke. You don't know anything.
Okay, you prefer that I was. What would you prefer?
That you're smarter, that you smarten up.
Okay, well, what would you recommend?
Well, you got to figure out what you're doing wrong, because you don't have any idea what you're doing.
Oh, Steve, can you help me? That sounds like a great idea.
Well, yeah, you got to smarten up.
Okay, well, where would you start? I mean, you sound like somebody who knows where they're going in life. Where would you start?
I think you're making some bad choices, and you got to make some better ones.
Okay, talk to me about that. I really appreciate it. You really have my best interests at heart here, Stephen. That is so nice.
So is that the typical sequence, or do you continue continue from that point?
Well, basically, yes, it is a sort of a typical sort of sequence. You'll notice that what I did was I was seeking to understand you a bit better, what you meant by that, and very often we do this thing. I mean, I used to use a couple of techniques in there. One of them was the accompaniment technique was this technique called reverso. In fact, it's really quite simple, and even like kids use it, and they become really masters at this. And it's really quite fun, and it can be we can be rolling around the place laughing with the stuff they come out with. But it's very simple. It's if somebody's accusing you of something or insulting you of something, it's generally negative. So what you can do is you would say, "Would you prefer that I was?" and you use the opposite of that, or you just leave it open. And then, if basically if they're attacking you with something negative, you turn it around and say, well, would you prefer that I was intelligent? Would you prefer that I was, quicker on my feet? Would you prefer, whatever it is, you can leave it open, which causes even more surprise, or you can, insert the positivity in it yourself. But if the other person brings the positive themselves, that's even better. And, once they've done that, you're actually giving it a positive direction. Because if they're giving you something negative, you've transformed it just positive by saying, what would you prefer?
So that in and of itself is well, yeah, that in and of itself is one of the big changes in the dynamic of, well, you insulted my mother, I'm going to insult your mother worse. It's you going and if someone's insults your mother, she says, oh, so, you think my mother needs to lose weight, or, you think whatever, and you're not, in a sense, opposing them, but you're responding and engaging to them in a way that isn't insulting them in return.
It isn't, but at the same time, you got to be careful that you're not just accepting what they're saying either. You're not agreeing with it. I'm not saying that, I am thick. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that you have ideas, and I want to see where you're going with this. I mean, on Saturday we was working with kids who were, ages 5 to 14, and the 5-year-old was absolutely fabulous in it. He was one of the other kids was saying to him, "Okay, you're such an animal." And he was going, "Well, what do you mean?" He goes, "You're an animal." He goes, "Well, what sort of animal?" He goes, "A green animal." And he responds, "I know what you mean, a crocodile." And it was just, this capacity to look and try and understand and see a bit more, and then come back with something, non-offensive, and it was fun, and everybody just started laughing because he was 5 and he was able to do this. It was absolutely fabulous. But it's stepping out of the conflict and having just these little reflexes by saying, for example, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And with having this sincere and genuine desire to understand the person, that takes a little bit of training, but it works and it's fun.
And in that process, that to me is really where I see the disarming come from, as opposed to that kind of like the verbal is like a sharp stick that they're trying to either pin you to the ground with or actually sort of put into you and hurt you. It becomes then this thing of you're moving away from it, you're moving out of it, and you're saying, "Oh, it's this, I'm a green monster, is it this, is it that?" And then that will almost distract them or dissolve a lot of the angry intention that they had carrying with them. Is that right?
Yeah, well, yes. It diminishes if, at the very least diminishes, but, in most situations it actually makes the aggression disappear. It has this capacity, really, it gives you the edge, because you've got this, it's almost like it's positive energy just sort of circling around you when you're doing it. So if the other person gets drawn into it, then very often they end up, smiling, laughing, or at the very least they'd be a bit more wary of how they would interact with you in the future if it's in a real case, because if they're looking for domination, if they're looking for somebody to test their skills of aggressivity or whatever, then they'll probably go looking for somebody else.
Well, again, because they would, with bullies and with a lot of those other circumstances, they're looking for people who aren't going to fight back or who aren't very skillful at responding to that aggression. And if they've got somebody who isn't an easy target or who doesn't do what they want them to do or expect them to do, that really breaks that cycle. Is that your experience? Yeah. Yes,
it does. In fact, you'll notice that, there's this sort of magical phenomenon that happens after a few classes, is that, people will come and they'll say, this happened or that happened, and this person said that, and they have all these, these different attacks, these accusations or these insults that they might, live or experience on a regular basis. And after 3 or 4 sessions, it's like they develop this confidence that they can handle it. And because they have that confidence, I'm sure you've seen even in Aikido or in any martial art, is that once they've developed that confidence that they can actually do certain things, they attract it less. These attacks become a lot less frequent.
Well, and that I think is a whole other conversation, because in so many circumstances it's having that sense of confidence is based off of the experience. It's knowing that if this stuff comes to you, you have a way of not building it up, of not sort of increasing it or, doing the sort of one-upmanship game of, well, I'm gonna out-shame you, I'm going to out-insult you, but basically you're going to meet them and then allow them to kind of continue doing what they're doing, but you're not really attached to it. You're not really contributing to it. You've sort of just let that stuff pass you by.
You do, yes. It's the key thing, and that if you've developed that reflex, you learn not to take things personally, and that's the key thing. You step out of the line of of the attack, So if you're stepping out of that line of attack and you're sort of circling in behind and trying to see things, physically, if you can imagine that circling behind and seeing the things from the other person's perspective, you're out of that line of attack. So you can't take it personally if you're out of that conflict.
Yeah, the vision, the visual one I like to give for folks is if you're standing and you're looking straight ahead and somebody comes behind you and puts their hands on your shoulders and they kind of look over your shoulder and sort of says, oh, this is what you're looking at. But then if you're the person on the front and you basically turn around so that you go and you stand behind them and then you have your hands on their shoulders, you can kind of see where they're going. So, this is our back to school series, and we're talking about going back to school. What advice do you have for students, for kids who may be verbally attacked when they go back to school? What's something that you can really give them, if they haven't had the chance of taking your training, that would, be really, really helpful to you? Or helpful to them, sorry.
Helpful to them, yeah. They would definitely be able to, they could dive into the many free resources that we have on our website, verbal-aikido.com. There's things like the first aid kit. There's so many examples, experiences, and lots of techniques that they can actually put into place quite quickly. But there's one thing that we do within the for the green bracelet certificate, which is sort of the initiation to Verbal Aikido, which is we ask them to write out their attack. If they were in a verbal exchange where there was abuse or bullying, whatever, that they actually write it out as it happened to the best of their ability, and then write out what could have happened, and at what point they could have, inserted this accompanying technique, or recognize that, destabilize the person maybe a little bit to be able to propose an Aiki, but write it out. And I don't know if they have the capacity always to work on it with somebody else, but actually playing out both sides of the exchange has enormous impact to really increase your empathy on one side, but also prepare yourself for any time something even similar happens again. You have one step ahead. You have that edge.
Yeah. So the advice would be, if you know it's coming or if you're worried about it, go ahead and practice it on your own. Either practice it with a friend or practice by yourself, writing out, okay, what would I do? What would I say? What would they say? And then that'll help you better figure out your response.
Yes, it would help. I mean, you may not have exactly the same response or exactly the same attack as happened in the past, but what's important is that everybody's got their sort of their sensitive points, or where if an attack hurt you in some way, if you felt hurt by something that somebody said, well then there's a way to protect it. There's a way to get around it. But knowing that is a really, really great first point. If somebody, if you're a bit overweight and somebody says, hey, fatty, or whatever, that if you're able to say, how did you respond to that? Did you just walk away? Did you accept it, or did you start calling another person names or whatever? And if you're able to, if you know that your weight, for example, is a sensitive spot for yourself, well then, developing the reflex to manage any attack on that is going to give you that confidence to know that if anybody talks to me about my weight, I know I can manage it. I'm good. And it does increase your confidence very, very quickly on that.
So just that little bit of preparation could be very useful for the students of, helping them think through it, and then also helping them think about how they could respond in a way that isn't necessarily coming from anger or fear. If somebody is feeling like they're overweight or they do get teased about that on a regular basis, figuring out a way to respond, that would be one of the real key preparation points that you could give to folks to help them improve or make going back to school a little easier.
Yes, yeah. There's many different techniques that they can find again in the books or on the website. But definitely practice practice really has, it's like any martial art. You can't just, go to one class and think, oh, that's it, now I'm good. Now I can go into the rough neighborhood and I'll be fine. I'm not sure if I'd do that myself. The key to it is this sort of development of a reflex, and if you're able to do that, then you'll be much more prepared, and you'll feel more confident in dealing with anything that comes at you verbally.
So in this part of our show, we invite the guest to provide an assignment for the week for our listeners. And the assignments are basically anything that the guest would think would, help the listeners either better understand the material or get the best benefit for from some of the advice or information that you've shared. So do you have an assignment or some type of thing that you could recommend to our listeners that would sort of help them engage further or learn more about what it is that you've got to offer?
Sure. One thing they can do straight away immediately is to think back to any exchange that they felt that they could have handled better, and we all have one at least. Just think back to an exchange that they were in that they feel that there was there's room for improvement anyway, and jot down a few ideas that would open it up, at least to open that up to a greater understanding. And that is an absolutely fabulous, it's a great starting place for to actually to see that there's an alternative to the ways we react. Instead of actually reacting, you're creating a response, which is much more solid and much more intentional. Another thing that they could do, which is a very interesting exercise, is what we call the verbal stretching activities again, which is this idea of really enhancing your listening, is to ask somebody what they mean by a certain word and just letting them explore it, and asking them as many questions without sort of bringing your own 2 cents worth. Just really exploring it for as long as possible. If you take the word respect, you take the word table, whatever, you take any word, and just really trying to get in behind and see how another person sees that word and what their life experiences are behind it. And just for a minute or two, if they're able to do that, then that's one of the exercises we do to practice this enhanced listening that we do in verbal stretching and verbal Aikido.
So, Luke, how can folks find you? And can you tell us also a bit more about the resources? You mentioned a book, you mentioned a website. So, can you go and tell our listeners how we can find you if they want to engage with you further on this?
Sure, Stephen. Well, if you'd like to invite me to come to the States and to come to your school or company, and then you can use the contact form on the website, and that's at verbal-aikido.com. Lots and lots of free resources there. You can also contact me through LinkedIn, or we've also got a Facebook page. There's a lot of stuff available. And what's your
Facebook page, Luke?
The Facebook page? Let me double check that now. I think it's just Verbal Aikido, as far as I know. Hold on, I'm going to double check.
So while you're looking that up, so you can find Luke on LinkedIn. So you would go to LinkedIn for Luke Archer, and then right. You've got the website, and then go ahead and what's your Facebook?
Okay, I can't find this. If you type in Verbal Aikido on Facebook, I'm pretty sure it's one of the only ones that comes up.
It'll show up there, and we'll make sure to have all these links available on the web page, so that when you go to the web page for the program, you'll have all those available there. Luke, any closing thoughts or closing comments for our listeners today?
Sure. Well, of course, there's the first book that came out a couple of years ago, the second book that came out last year. They're available on Amazon, and both in paper, if you prefer paper and ink format, but also electronic version. I'd really like to thank you, Stephen, for this opportunity to come in and share these ideas with your audience. And peace to you all. Peace.
Well, Luke, thank you again so much for your joining us today, your thoughts, your way of encouraging students and kids to look differently at how they're responding to situations and choose a different way. So, Luke, thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you for listening to the Texas Conflict Coach. We hope you enjoyed the program. You can find all of our podcasts archived to listen at your convenience at texasconflictcoach.com or download the podcast at iTunes or Stitcher Radio. You can also become a Facebook fan of Conflict Connection or Twitter me at TX Conflict Coach.